to get to that, Gary, you really need to make sure you have everything on your purchase orders. So we talk a lot about that, making sure we get everything on PO. If we have staff members, our frontline teams calling up a vendor and getting something shipped in direct, you're not going to have that visibility. So you got to get that data cleaned up so you can actually have those conversations.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
Today, we are speaking with Ginger Sharp, Vice President and Chief Supply Chain Officer at Legacy Health. And Gary, we're going to be talking about clinically integrated networks today with Ginger. And honestly, it's a great opportunity. Value analysis is on the rise. And I just think she's going to give us some really good insights into how to engage the clinicians and really break down these silos and start working together, because we need transformative healthcare initiatives today.
No, Justin, I agree with you. I think she's going to bring some energy. She is passionate about supply chain, and I think she'll share that. I hope she shares a lot of that during the podcast. And I'm really curious to see how she reaches out to those clinically integrated network individuals, those key stakeholders, while thinking about mission, as we always talk about. So I'm really looking forward to see where Ginger brings this at an executive level presence and just where she's going to go with it. It's going to be a good one today during Supply Chain Week officially. So looking forward to her presentation.
Yeah, it'll release a lot later, but we are smack dab in the middle of Supply Chain Week right now. And we're going to be back with a great supply chain leader, Ginger Sharp, up next here on Power Supply.
Bam! I'm Hayes Walter.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Ginger Sharp, Vice President and Chief Supply Chain Officer at Legacy Health. We're going to be talking about clinically integrated networks today. And Ginger, many people may know you as Ginger Henry, your recent change of your last name. And I want to welcome you to the show, but I know you've got a really cool story about getting married on your favorite hiking trail. So before we even get into clinically integrated networks, I want to hear that story as well. Thanks for coming on this episode of Power Supply.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thanks all. Thanks for having me today. Why not start off on something fun like a wedding on a trail, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I've always loved the outdoors, and we are trying to figure out how to get married, when to get married. I have a teenage son, and it was just kind of getting complicated. So we said, let's elope. So we decided to do that. We love hiking out on this one trail near our home here and in Washington. And we went ahead and just said, let's go do that. We found a photographer who does these outdoor events, and she just comes along. She doesn't even really do anything. So I got to have my son help with the rings and the vows, and it was really fun. So we just did that last month, actually, Justin.
Okay. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that. Good for you. I love that. Ups. Good for you.
You know, honestly, I think sometimes those days become all about everybody else instead of about you. So I think that was a great call. So congratulations, just a month ago. So recent name change, in case anybody knows you as Ginger Henry, and you are quite well known. And I will also say, I saw a bunch of great photos from the WISHMA conference which is the ARM chapter in your region, you and several people from your team representing in person at the conference. So I just think that's also great. And what other people don't know is while this episode will release later, we're right smack dab in the middle of Healthcare Supply Chain Week as we're recording this as well. So thank you for all the hard work that you've done, especially over the last several years. I know it's gotten a little bit crazier lately.
Yeah, good call out for Supply Chain Week. It's something that we always celebrate. We want to celebrate our teams each and every day, but it's wonderful to be able to honor them this one time a year for the ARM National Supply Chain Week in Healthcare. So great call out.
Well, Ginger, now I'm going to call you out on some of your background and experience. In case somebody doesn't know you, can you just talk about your path to healthcare supply chain yourself?
Well, the ironic thing is when I started my career, I was going to be doing a career pivot about 20 years ago, and I didn't even know what supply chain was. It was quite funny. I hadn't actually taken a business class before, and I went to get my MBA, and 2 weeks in, I'm like, wow, what's supply chain? But it was full, so I moved ahead. I ended up doing a fellowship at a hospital in Miami, Florida, Nicholas Children's Hospital, and my 1-year fellowship stint kept me there for another 8 years. My son was born there in Miami, Florida, and really enjoyed it. But I had a calling to come back to the Northwest. So I ended up working in a local hospital doing surgery and managed all the business operations there, including, what do you know it, supply chain. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was great working with physicians, clinicians, and just really diving in and understanding how all of that worked. And had a promotional opportunity there at a organization, Peace Health, out in the Northwest here. And I just recently, 4 years ago, had the chance to become the vice president of Legacy Health. So here I am, and I had no idea I'd be in supply chain, but I'll tell you, supply chain is amazing. I know we'll get talking about that a little bit more as we jump into clinical integration, but I love supply chain because it's really how you can connect with people, clinicians, and just across the organization. I think your intro covers it quite well in this podcast. It touches everything.
What I really heard, and I was like, oh, she's teeing up this interview so well, is you were talking about how much you liked working with the surgeons and the clinicians. And I would say even watching organizations like AVAP, the Association for Healthcare Value Analysis Professionals, their attendance at their event was really big this past year, too, at their annual conference. And I think that really spun out of having a clinically integrated supply chain. And I think the changes in healthcare today and what we need to do to really engage clinicians to break down the silos is very relevant. So when you talk about clinically integrated supply chain, the fact that you love working with the clinicians is a great place to start. When you think of a clinically integrated supply chain, what does that look like? Like high level kind of vision for that from your perspective?
Well, first, I'm going to start off with what clinically integrated supply chain is not. So traditionally in supply chain, we have to focus on our savings initiatives. And we all know as a leader in supply chain, we're going to have savings requirements. That's just a normal thing. And we still have savings requirements. We have one every year, and we're having our targets driven upwards, and we just have to do that to meet the needs for the cost containment work we have to do, and just a lot of inflation and costs going up across the board in supplies and services. So we know we're going to have to hit those savings targets, but if you're only focusing on savings, you're really missing part of the work we can do to really align and get that work going. We only can go so far when you have operational leaders and clinicians who are, you mentioned earlier, there's been a lot going on in healthcare and people are really still tired. I think the fallout from the pandemic and then, in supply chain, all of the challenges we've had with back orders and supply shortages, people are just really, really tired. So it's important to think about, yes, the savings, but then also looking at how we can actually integrate within that work and not making decisions in a silo. So when I think about clinically integrated supply chain, it's then how do we take that to the next level and really partner? It's all about relationships, just really about relationships and diving into what we're trying to solve. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Not just cost, but the quadruple aim of cost, quality, outcomes, experience, all those things that make a difference in how we make decisions in supply chain.
Well, Ginger, you're hitting on my topic, and Hayes and Justin have heard it numerous times. It's about mission, right? It's about mission, and the fiduciary responsibility falls right behind it, taking care of patients, staff, or clinical leaders. So I love you bringing that up. and talking about it. I would like you to expand a little bit more on how do you get the right people, and who are the right people at the table to really take that down the path, the key stakeholders at the table, because supply chain is now, I feel like more than ever, we're at the table, but who are those other key people to help drive that home with what we're talking about with the mission and the fiduciary responsibility in hand?
Gary, you're absolutely right on the mission piece. It is critical. We have to have the dollars to be able to keep the mission going and take care of the patients. And every dollar we can keep within our organizations is dollar we can invest in either capital or the people taking care of the patients. So it's absolutely true. We have to drive to that mission. So how do we find the right people to really make the impact? I think it really depends. And I know when I started at Legacy, we had to go around, and it was wonderful, go around and meeting people, kind of do that meet and greet. Sometimes you're doing a virtual if you can't meet them in person. And then we had leaders who joined during the pandemic when people were working more remotely, and you have to figure out a way to connect with people. So I think half of it, back to that relationship component, you have to just get out there and find the people. And sometimes it's the leaders, and sometimes it's those influential frontline staff that really make a difference. So you kind of have to just play it by ear and figure it out. And sometimes you want some wins. So maybe find something that's more simple to address and get some frontline staff, and they can help you drive a decision. Everyone feels excited. They feel engaged. And then you can make more changes that are complicated as you move forward.
I really like that, because you're talking about how you gain some momentum by building an initial layer of trust, but ultimately you want to get that level of trust to a level of confidence, so that when you're bringing those maybe more complex initiatives forward, they have the confidence that, oh, we've got a track record of success with this team, and they're going to be more reluctant to take some bigger, I don't know, home run swings or more complicated initiatives forward, because they realize that not only do they trust you to do what you say, but they have the confidence that it's going to be successful. Would you say there's kind of a methodology to that, especially when there's turnover and maybe new leadership in supply chain?
Yeah, the turnover piece, that is a good call out. We've had so much turnover, right? And then we talked about people being burnt out. So maybe someone's like, I'm tired of working on those things. I just can't do it right now. Or I'm working on this top initiative over here. I can't help you out. So you have to just kind of ask around sometimes and find the right people. I really think that finding those wins is a great way to do it. And it's going to take time to build that trust. And maybe you build a little bit of trust, and then you have an error and you just call out your mistakes. I really try to get my teams to understand that failure is good. If you think of Sarah Blakely, I always love the Spank story and how her dad used to have the kids at the table talk about, what did you fail at today? I love that, because if we don't try to fail, if we don't take a little risk here and there, you're not going to move anywhere. So I think it's okay to make mistakes, or to have a perceived mistake, or to have a failure and take a step back and just work with the clinicians on how we're going to do that. So I like to just keep working with them and saying, okay, that didn't go so well. Why don't we reflect on what that looked like, what happened, how can we do better the next time? I'm listening to you. So a lot of listening is really important.
Absolutely. Ginger, let me just throw this out there as far as the initiatives, where they come from, the blueprint. Is that you? Is that your CMO? Is that the C-suite? Who is making those ultimate decisions that you ultimately would push through? Where do those initiatives come from?
I would say we're still working on that, Hayes. We have some challenges there, and we're trying to make some improvements. We have a wonderful calendar that we actually put together, and we have teams of people from our prime distributor helping us, give us examples of things we can work on, and then we'll pick those. And often what we'll do is say, okay, there's 10 things we can work on. Now let's take those through the clinical value analysis process and get those clinicians and operational leaders to buy in on it. Do we need to evaluate the product? Is it a service we're looking at? And just kind of go through that process to get them engaged. If we're able to get to the place we want to get to, we'll have more of that upfront support. So we can say, yes, we're all aligned. We're going to be working on these 10 initiatives, and here's the calendar for how it's going to look like. We're not quite there yet, but we do have that strong value analysis committee process. And I really think that's how you get the engagement. It's a great place to start. So we want to have that kind of approach where we can get people upfront involved in the decision making. And we're kind of doing it in arrears, but we just got to keep asking those questions. Back to the savings initiatives, we have to get savings. So we're going to have to keep pushing some unfun things sometimes, like conversions, but it also is driving the ultimate results of taking cost out.
Are you asking more of your suppliers to engage the clinicians? Like, because when I hear clinically integrated supply chain, and I also think about just that reach, and then you talk about the turnover and building the confidence. And I think it used to be where it was almost like vendors might be going directly to the clinicians and then leveraging that against supply chain. Whereas now I think we've adjusted that strategy and it's almost like it's come full circle. And I see a lot of organizations actually relying on their suppliers to help them engage the clinicians in initiatives. Have you noticed that kind of a shift in strategy there?
Yeah, we've definitely had that shift with our prime distributor. So we partner with Medline and we have them actually part of our team. We say, hey, you're part of our team. Now, if there's something sensitive and they need to step out of our meeting, that's fine. But we want to make sure they're really engaged. They're considered an integrated partner. So having them provide us the support, if there's a challenge with a product, they're really leaning in. During all those back orders challenges, they're partnering with us. So I think that is really key to have them be more of a partner from that perspective. We are seeing some of our suppliers really lean in and give us additional value. If we look at bundles around capital equipment and things we're working on, we are seeing suppliers really lean in that way. Not all, but we're really pushing people and the suppliers we work with to get us an extra value. And I hear people having great luck with that. It doesn't hurt to start having those conversations with your suppliers and just say, hey, you're our prime vendor for CRM or whatever the product is. What do you have to offer? How can we take cost out for you and you take cost out for us? If you can make it a win-win, that's really the way to go.
I'm going to come back to Hayes. Hayes had a great question, so I'm going to give him a little bit of props. And I know, Justin, write this down. It is supply chain week, so I'm going to compliment
Hayes. We get a great
Hayes.
question from the guest once in a while, but that's the first time one of the other hosts has said that it was a great question.
I know. It's, Hayes, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'll get the $100 later. Initiative calendar, we were talking about initiative and vendors and this whole conversation to Justin, you added on, and Ginger getting into the facts that you're working with your prime distributor as a key stakeholder when needed, when not needed on some sensitive meetings internally. But, getting to the data and the spend management tools, the analytics to support that moving forward. Is it more of an internal construct? Is it more an external support? Is it a combination of both? There's so many of these different opportunities and companies out there with all these spend management tools. What are you seeing, Ginger, that has been working well in your experience, and maybe we can share with some of our listeners out there?
Yeah, what do they say about trust and verify? We like to put work back on our vendors. I mean, our teams are really strapped for time and we're tired. And so if we can have them run some numbers for us and say, hey, give us an ROI on this, or give us what do you expect this to look like? What can we do if we did 20%, 50%, 90% of this implementation or something else? So we do push back on them and ask them to help us get us the information. But then we're also kind of verifying, is that accurate? Is that what we think it's going to look like? Is that a really conservative number or too aggressive? So I think really understanding that spend management approach is really good. To get to that, Gary, you really need to make sure you have everything on your purchase orders. So we talk a lot about that, making sure we get everything on PO. If we have staff members, our frontline teams calling up a vendor and getting something shipped in direct, you're not going to have that visibility. So you got to get that data cleaned up so you can actually have those conversations. Great question. It's all about data, really, right? I mean, how do you make decisions if you don't have data?
I could go down that rabbit hole on the PO and cleansing the data and, trying to stay focused on the clinically integrated supply chain theme. So maybe we flip that back around and say, okay, so part of cleaning up the data too is you do have to engage clinicians to get good charge capture and all of the data. Think about bill only POs. Maybe that's a good place to segue to kind of stay on theme, because a lot of times those bill only POs, it's hard to track down. And oftentimes the information that you're getting is paper based. So it's hard to run, an analysis on it. Do you want to kind of maybe take that ball and run with it a little bit here?
Yeah, so a couple of things based on the data component. I always think about your master data and it has to be really clean. And there's been kind of two different trains of thought in supply chain. Do you load everything into your item master, or do you only load the things you use most of the time? And if you think about the bill only component, if you want to have that right data, you probably want to have everything loaded in the item master. Just to think about the folks who have to deal with it coming into the OR, the nurses who have that are tapping into the EHR, your medical record system, and trying to get the information to flow over from your ERP. If you don't have all that information lined out, you might not have that visibility. So I think there's different discussions we're even having here at Legacy around what items do we have in the item master and thinking through that whole process from start to finish. And I think back to clinically integrated or just integrated conversations, you do need to involve all the parties. So you think of the surgeon's approach, you think of the folks managing the implant requisitions, the folks bringing in the implant trays. If you have those conversations with folks and really understand their workflow, you can make sure that what you're doing on the contract side, you can have the best pricing in the world, but if you don't implement it right, it won't matter. So it's really how you integrate all those processes across the board. I think that's truly part of clinically integrated supply chain.
Who are some of your, or maybe some examples of who is the most engaged from your clinician partners, right? Like, and not that I'm trying to get you to give us a prototype. Maybe you want to tell us a success story, how somebody got engaged or got, maybe it's even somebody, I find a lot of times, sometimes the person who is the most critical of you ends up being your best partner. And I can see that happening in like when you're trying to get clinically integrated.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, I have had an experience when I was working in the OR. There was a surgeon I worked with, and she didn't like me saying, what could be approved, not approved, or I didn't say what could not be approved, but you have to bring it through our value analysis process. And we had some challenges where she might call me up. I'd be in my office and she'd say, come down, put your scrubs on, get over here. I need to show you this. And so I put my scrubs on, come on down to the OR and take a look at what she's doing. And she wanted to show me something. This new widget can really make a difference. And she'd explain it. And we had some challenges and some really heated conversations over the couple years that I was there. But then later on, she ended up being in a leadership quality role. And she became one of my closest partners for how we dealt with clinically integrated supply chain. So it was a complete pivot. So that for her, I think, was just seeing both sides of it. And I think when she was in the OR, she didn't see both sides. She saw her side. And then when she became a leader, she was like, okay, now I get it all. And she became one of my best partners to really work through process issues and to help with other conversations with surgeons and how we dealt with things in surgery across the board. So that's sometimes just you have a lucky partnership, like those relationships you build, you can get them to see your side of the story. Other folks, we just had some examples of, I think sometimes people it clicks for them. They maybe get involved in a conversation about something or you say, hey, can you help me with this initiative? And then you're working through and they kind of see, oh, that's how the vendor is asking those questions. Oh, that's how we have to look at it. And that's why you're asking me those questions. So just having them involved in a project sometimes can really get them to have that shift. And it can be a two-way conversation too. We can hear more about what they're thinking and vice versa. It's a mutual improvement in that case. So we just have sometimes people that just get excited. How can I save money? And they want to help their patients.
All right, Ginger, let me jump in here to your point of being called into the OR to show something. Obviously, Legacy's got a lot of hospitals, right? Do you find yourself, because I know vendors will say this, suppliers will say this, but do you find yourself that one hospital, this campus is much more in tune with you and working with you as compared to the other? And how do you handle that? In other words, you might have 5 hospitals that are just whatever you say or want, they'll do. But the others might fight and push and pull a little bit. How do you handle that?
So you're talking about the culture of the hospitals and also the leaders. So yeah, that can be a challenge. And I don't think we have any that just jump and say, we'll do whatever you want, but
oh, come on.
Yeah.
Game on.
We do have, I think it comes down to the leadership sometimes, and then also that trust component. So as you work with a new leader coming on board, they want to see, hey, what are you doing? They want to understand what the program looks like and meeting them when they're ready to be met. So sometimes someone comes on board, they're dealing with hot emergencies. And so maybe you don't partner with them right away. Maybe you connect with the CNO there or the CMO or whoever is excited to work with you. And you let that leader, that C-suite leader kind of help you later. So I've experienced it where it's just maybe not the right time. And I also see where the different hospitals may shift. Like one hospital may be really easygoing and ready to work with us. And then they have some stressful situations going on and they're not now willing to work with you. So you have to be really aware, just like when you're working with anybody else. If there's a team who may be exhausted, okay, maybe we're not going to have them evaluate that new product. Maybe we go to the other hospital this time instead. And it's always kind of a shifting pivot.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That makes sense.
And if they're exhausted, they don't have the time to tell you they're exhausted. So you almost have to kind of have your tentacles out there thinking, like trying to size up where are they all at? And I can imagine also for your own benefit, using your time wisely, trying to force something, that isn't going to happen right away. You can end up spinning your wheels where you could be putting your time and energy into another area that, or another hospital that's ready to move. Like they've got their feet under them and they're ready to do something. So how hard is that to just stay in touch with how everybody's kind of doing throughout a health system like that, when it's not just checking in with supply chain, it's checking in with all the different departments?
Yeah, it's a back to the relationship thing and making sure your staff are also reaching out with their customers. So it can be really, I find it really exciting. I find relationships really, it's something, part of my passion, and I really find it something that helps me move forward in my career. And I love the relationships, and it's just kind of how we do our work. But I know it's always really hard when people are really tapped out for capacity and they don't have time to do all that. So it's how can we help each other? If you think about the leadership team, how can we reach in and help do some rounding or make sure we're there? So a lot of it's just like, okay, if they're really exhausted on the frontline staff, maybe I'll go and check in with the leadership at that site. Or maybe the operations leader will go check in at that site. So it just kind of depends on what you need to have happen. But you just got to keep it going, and it will help in the long run.
So, Ginger, you brought up a really good point. I remember back in the day when we had rounding, it was the 10-5 rule. So at 10 feet, when you're walking down the hallway, you saw somebody, you're like, acknowledge them. At 5 feet, you kind of stopped. How are things going? Can I help you with anything? And just checking and making the rounds. We learned so much more of just being in our office. You would hear needs, and we need this on med surg floor, and the ICU needs this. And so are you seeing an uptick? Are we getting back to rounding? Are we getting post-pandemic? Are we there? Is it increasing like it should? I think it's just a big point. So I want to hear your perspective.
I think it is for those on-site leaders. I believe they are rounding for sure. We've done something a little bit different just because I'm not at a single hospital like I was, back in the day, where I could be there on site and I could go take a walk at my break and go chat with people across the hospital. Working in a system office kind of approach where you have different staff members working remotely and others who are at each individual site. And we're close. Like Legacy we can drive to each other's hospitals, so it's not too far apart, but we're not all working in the same spot. So we've kind of gone and done a little formal, we're kind of experimenting with our rounding and supply chain. And we have executive rounding where we're having the on-site operational manager, myself, our directors, and then other key leaders do these kind of pop-in, like it's like a pop-up, right? Here we are, we're going to do some rounding. We'll come to your office, or you can come meet us, or meet in the cafeteria. We'll be wherever you need us to be. And we are doing that with the executive, the triad, if you will. So we have the hospital presidents, CMOs, CNOs, and just checking in with them. What do you need from us? Here's our savings target for your site. What are we doing from an initiative perspective? So just kind of keeping them in alignment of what we're doing, and then really hearing from them what they're doing. So that's been really helpful. And then we also do that with just some of the key staff that are at those sites. So we might have the leader in surgery, cath lab, those kind of folks. So we can actually do those. We're hearing the customer.
That's really good. How often do you do those again?
Well, we had a plan of doing a monthly, and it's just kind of depending now on people's time. So we're doing that. We try to do it monthly at one hospital per site. We also have picked up what we're doing on an accountability review. It's just our teams that get together once a month. So we're doing a kind of little open house at the end of that day where people can pop in. We had one last week, and I felt like I was at a happy hour. Everyone hadn't seen each other for a long time, and we hadn't sat down at the table, so it was like mingling in the conference room. It was really fun. But the leaders who stopped by said they were so happy to meet with us, and we actually got some problem solving done, which was really great. We heard them, and we're following up on some things they need.
That's fantastic.
I feel like with the back orders, there's a real opportunity to engage, because I think maybe, and speaking as a clinician myself, this was all very much Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain. Nobody's paying attention to it. And then all of a sudden we were doing these consolidation efforts and really trying to streamline down to just a few select preference items, right? And just get that item master crunched down as much as we could. And then all of a sudden it got turned on its head. And now we need to do all these alternatives, and we need to have, backup plans. And that does place a lot of, I think, emphasis on value analysis to move quickly but efficiently too. And so when I think about that whole dynamic, I kind of wonder, is this a place where now the visibility is there for the clinicians in their day to day, and they realize, like, to have some control over that, they almost need to not just engage with supply chain, but understand it so that they sort of navigate this back order scenario like successfully instead of with frustration?
Yeah, I would say the backorder piece, unfortunately, we have to deal with that. And unfortunately, we've had some quality issues too. During the pandemic when we had some shortages, and then we also had the raw materials. So we might have a supplier subbing a different raw material, which then could have caused a quality issue, and we couldn't quite figure out what's going on. Why are these things breaking or bending, or they're thinner than they used to be? And so we had a lot of those things too. Like, we had the same product, but it wasn't the same. So just trying to figure out how to troubleshoot and problem solve, it was really an opportunity, and still is, unfortunately, for our clinical value analysis teams to really lean in. We always think about the clinical value analysis nurses on our team and how they're kind of a liaison between what we non-clinicians do and what the clinical teams need. So it's a great way to have that partnership. So yeah, we can learn a lot, and it's been so confusing for the frontline teams. I mean, how do they know? Is this a back order? Oh, it's a back order of a back order. Great. Yeah. So that communication piece really ties in well. How do we get that information out to people so they know what's a back order versus, yeah, we planned this conversion, and no, we didn't even know about that. Let us dive in and help you figure out what's going on.
I never really thought about that. Same SKU, like product.
Right.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. It's been a very big challenge and a good learning opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Any best practices, tips, or maybe general final thoughts that the audience can take away as they maybe continue to leverage value analysis and become more clinically integrated and try to bust down these silos? Because I really don't know that any department other than supply chain has the opportunity to break down the silos versus some others. It just by virtue of the fact that you touch all of the departments.
Isn't that why it's so fun, though?
Yeah.
I mean, we touch everything, and we have so
much fun. I love your energy. This is awesome.
Exactly.
It's so fun. Yeah.
No wonder you're good at what you do.
Yeah.
So I want to mention one more thing that we're doing at Legacy, and I know a lot of organizations do this, focusing on lean. And you think, okay, what is the, lean manufacturing or those kind of things? It's kind of a trendy thing, but we find it's really helpful to get to the bottom of the root cause. And I've always liked the 5 whys. So if you're out rounding or talking with a team member and, well, we don't do it this way. Well, why is that? And then you just kind of dive into that and you get to the 5th why, and then you'll have, oh, that's the real root cause. So we like to talk about leading with curiosity. And I'll just say that works in clinical areas, non-clinical areas. It's just a great way to say, hey, we're not trying to say who's right and wrong here. We're just trying to figure out what's really going on. And it kind of takes people out of their responsiveness or defensiveness, and it can really help us get to the root cause. So we're trying to do that a lot when we have something come up where it's been a hot topic, and those happen. We have a back order and we have to address it, and people are not happy about it. So we try to get to those root causes using the lean techniques that we use at Legacy. So I'd recommend, if you're not familiar with that, dive into it, figure out some tools you can use to help with problem solving. It really helps you get to the root cause versus trying to figure it out in a way that's just really, really hard.
I love that the root cause analysis is not simply an empirical process, that there requires some soft skills and some personality to really get down in there and know what's really going on. Ginger, phenomenal interview. Like Hayes said, you've got great energy, great passion for what you do, and I love that you love it.
Well, everybody else should love it too. Happy Supply Chain Week all, and I really appreciate your time and having me on the show today.
That was Ginger Sharp, Vice President and Chief Supply Chain Officer with Legacy Health, and Hayes. Really great conversation around clinically integrated networks, but not just the whole clinical integration piece, but just how much things have changed. And I love how we wrapped it up on back orders, just talking about that being such an opportunity to engage clinicians because their awareness of supply chain is so much greater today than it ever has been before.
Well, to your point, right. I mean, obviously through the last 3 years with COVID, that was, point number one. But I love that she actually gave some very practical advice and how they actually go about at Legacy meeting with their leadership at each different facility, each hospital. I just really thought she brought some really good perspective and I enjoyed it. Hopefully everybody else can take something home with this as well.
Yeah. And the energy and the passion. I gotta say, to lead through difficult times like this, you really do have to love it. And she clearly does.
Oh, no question about it. And that's the reason I think she's really, really good at what she does. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.